everybody, I am super excited because I have Skye Lewin here, music director and composer over at Bungie. Hi Skye, how are you?
Great, thanks. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm really great. I'm super stoked to have you on here. Destiny music's been around for how many years now? I feel like it's like a cornerstone for some people's lives. It's really great to just be able to like sit here and have a chat about music and about, you know, what goes into your work in the day to day. And yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time out. So it means a lot. What's the feeling for you when you finish, you know, an expansion like Lightfall or the Witch Queen? Like, is there a sense of relief, or do you feel like you're instantly like, okay, that was cool, good job everybody, Onirophobia next, you know what I mean, and you just got to keep moving? Or do you feel like you get like a minute to slow down and sort of like take stock of what you've done?
A bit of both. You know, we're constantly working on things, and so as soon as one thing is done, something else is already in flight, and we're on that. The pace definitely does have a bit of a change, and so there is the feeling of, cool, we did a thing. Let's kind of absorb it and see how it went, and learn from what we can do better next time, and all of that.
Yeah. What I find so interesting about video game music is that connection. I've actually started calling them modern operas in some ways, because I feel like the music is so deeply entrenched with the narrative. So like when you're composing and with the team and creating things, how is that working? Is it like picture to picture where you're setting the score while watching the cutscenes, or are you sort of just like, they're like, okay, this is really sad, the Cabal are destroying everything, it's sad? Like, how's that process as from a compositional perspective?
It can be both. It depends on the context. I mean, cutscenes are different from scoring game activities. The common thread, though, is that it all starts with, what is the experience? What is it that you're trying to support with the score? What emotions are we trying to convey? You know, whose perspective is it? All of those things kind of mixed together are the core of it. And then everything else, kind of how we technically handle things and what the collaborative process is, or whether or not there's visuals or, you know, picture to work to, all that stuff kind of depends on the specifics.
Well, it's certainly really interesting, because I feel like there's so much content. And so it's like, how are you also thinking about like the through line? Because everything is, now we're going on 10 years of this. So like everything is connected, and we're referencing things from 10 years ago. And, you know, the first Cabal stomp introduction all the way here. Is it more stressful now because there's so much like motives, there's so many motifs, and there's so many things that, you know, you're talking about referencing characters. We're like referencing different races, different factions, the Guardian theme, the Travelers theme, all this other stuff. Does it get a little bit convoluted?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of connections and moving parts, you know, narrative connections, and what types of combatant types, and the destinations that we visit, and the palettes and the feel of what the music is in those places. And yeah, it's a good amount to keep track of, but I would say that it's kind of just part of the journey. And in the same way that when you're playing the game, you just kind of absorb it as it goes. It's similar, but in a slightly different way as we're making it. We're absorbing it as it goes and kind of weaving in the right things in the right places. And yeah, just keeping tabs on what those things are, so that the right things don't get dropped in the wrong moments, etc.
Right. Well, it's a really interesting thing too, from like a compositional perspective. I talk about this a lot on the channel. It was really interesting when I started this thing, because I was sort of concerned that because I'm not a composer, because I come from a decade of understanding emotional context, I was a little bit nervous, because I was like, well, I don't really know like what chord progressions are what happening here, and what polyrhythms and things. But what's amazing is that for you all, and it's something that I think is wholly unique to the Bungie music team, is this idea that we're like, you're eliciting emotion even with like single instruments. Like I'm thinking about the fight with Rourke and the Vow of the Disciple. That action sequence when you first meet him is just a snare drum. It's just like this light percussion. And it's so interesting how you can create so much emotion within just like one instrument. And that's ultimately the goal of the composition team, is to create a feeling so that the player has an emotional response. But it's like this weird symbiotic, like, you know, you need each other. And it's so cool what composition and composers can do, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I liken it to like, you know, to art. You know, colors they induce a certain emotional reaction, and same thing with sounds. You know, we get to play around with sound in a really fun way. And I think it was Zappa who said something like, a composer is a guy who goes around forcing his will on unsuspecting air molecules. And it's basically what we get to do, is like, yeah, what's the way that we want to convey this particular thing? Because there's so many options, and it's just crux of it is just finding the thing that we think works best. And the aesthetic part of it is kind of the core of what what makes it work or not work.
What drew you to video games? I know you've worked on TV and NCIS and things, and obviously now you've been at Bungie since 2014, since Destiny 1, I believe.
Yeah, I worked on Destiny 1 and joined full time right after Destiny 1 shipped. I think the thing that's the most appealing about video games is the dynamic nature of the score and the technical side of it. Like, it's awesome working on records because it's just music for the sake of music. And it's awesome working on television and film because you can really hone in and polish, the visual and the way the music scores it. But it's a fixed experience. And as nice as it is to be able to polish it and hone it in and get it right where you want it to be, there's something engaging about that extra challenge of the dynamic nature in video game music where it isn't the same every time. It might play back differently in this context or that context, or if the player does this thing, then the music reacts in this way. And even if you do the same thing exactly the same way, the music might not be exactly the same each time. And that dynamic nature of making it work and still sound fluid, I really find that to be engaging and a fun part of the process. So
in a lot of the comments, because I did a Witch Queen playthrough, and which was focused around like, oh, they probably chose to do this way because this elicits this response, and listen to the way the drums are. A lot of the comments I got were talking about the dynamic music and how Bungie and Destiny really is one of the only few games that's able to really create this sort of like, ever shifting kind of process. And something that really comes to mind is it was on Europa, and there was a section, right, I don't remember where it was, but we were fighting the Cabal, and it was this really interesting beat pattern, purely rhythmic, and yet it like had this driving force. And then you instantly, once like this giant tank comes in, suddenly the music shifts, and it's like, it gets heroic, and you hear the horns come in and stuff. It's so cool how you all are able to like take and modify and expand on like a simple gesture, kind of like Roke's thing, like I was talking about earlier. You take one thing and then suddenly it's like this, it shifts. It's so unique to Destiny. I feel like it's awesome.
There's lots of games that do lots of cool things with scores, and I think in that regard we're not unique. But I think one thing that is sort of different around Destiny is it's almost like an action movie the way it's and so the score is growing with the activity. And in a lot of games, you might not have that same dynamic. A lot of games, the score might be, playing a little moment here, and then there's no score for a while, and another moment here. Right. Destiny has moments like that, of course, but it definitely has much more kind of action movie cinematic in the approach, which is fun from a composition standpoint.
Do you also think about like silence? So like I remember there's a part at Roke's Pyramid where there's no noise, there's no music, there's just silence. And I wondered to myself as I was playing through it, if that was an intentional choice from the compositional perspective to be like, let's just let the sound design carry this.
That's always a consideration. As an audio team, we meet and discuss where sound design, where moments need to coexist, and how each moment would benefit from what the primary voice is. And sometimes it's a matter of one thing making room for another. Sometimes it's a matter of just timing when each happens. But yeah, that type of thing and making room, even just with the way an activity is scored, is something we always are aware of. You don't want to have it be in your face all the time for too long. And that's a challenge with games because what could take somebody 4 minutes could take somebody else 30. And so the score has to kind of be able to breathe in the event that it does take 30 minutes and not feel too just oppressive. But yeah, making room for space between the music, just like the space between the notes kind of concept. It's definitely important.
Well, it must go into also thinking about like, where you add a piano, where you add a forte, where you add a mezzo piano, a fortissimo, and where there's a peak and a climax. I mean, I'll never forget when I was singing, there was someone that was singing that was exceptional. As she continued to sing, I was like, this is good, but nothing's happening. It's just very good. And, it's like weird, right? Because like you would think, oh, what a great singer. But then you're also like, all right, well, this is 8 minutes and nothing's happened. So, factoring in for, like you said, we've been pretty loud here for 3 minutes. Maybe we pull back and we have an introspective moment where you feel a little bit more sense of a desperation. I mean, obviously you all I assume you factor that in and how to make that, the peaks and the valleys.
Yeah. And I think largely the most important consideration with that is that it's driven by the experience. What is the narrative arc and the goal of the thing that we're scoring, whether it's an activity or a cinematic, or it kind of tells you what it wants. And our job is to listen to that and put the right things in the right places.
You've worked on so many great pieces. Ash, the Journey, Kronos Quartet, that's that Deep Stone Lullaby. But is there a particular piece that you have worked on that has really felt really powerful for you that you've loved?
I mean, yeah, there's a bunch. I could probably name, I could name a bunch. Yeah, I think I wouldn't say I have like a favorite, but there's a lot that when I hear them again, I'm like, oh, I still like that piece. And that's, you know what they say with a work of art of any kind, you never finish, you just have to stop at some point. And so a lot of them, it's like, I would have loved to have done more with that, but there wasn't time, and it, you know, we met the thing we needed to meet, and so that is what it is forever. And a lot of them, yeah, I'll go back and I'll listen to it and say, yeah, I'm still okay with where that came out. And there's a couple, and people on our team know which ones those are for me, where I'm like, I don't really want to hear that one ever again.
Please don't play it.
There's not many, but there's a few, and you know, yeah. So the inverse is true as well.
Yeah, of course. It's been amazing too to see the just the community response to something like Deep Stone Lullaby, where it's incredible that moment. It's just like the soft, gentle piano, and it really. I made a video about it, and it really does sound like Elgar's Enigma variations. Like, it's incredible to hear like things that I pick up on, you know, from a classical perspective of years and years and years of understanding classical music, to hear little glimpses of that. It's so cool to see like where we are in music and where we've come from. And like, you know, you all are, I feel like you're also pushing the boundaries, especially lately, because there's a lot more synth in here, and there's a lot more of that sort of crunchy witness darkness theme that's coming in. And it's interesting to get like this fully orchestrated thing with like incredible synthesizer, you know, especially in Lightfall. It's so cool how you all are evolving. I feel like I'm starting to ask you questions, and then I just start praising. So, you know, you're like, I don't know where this is going. Frankly, I don't either. It's just praise. But you know what I mean? It's like, it's so interesting how you all are like taking music and evolving it while still keeping it to its roots.
Yeah, and thanks. I think we definitely have that composer's dream of like, you know, a playground with Destiny, because there is so much breadth to the universe, and that allows us to, like, while we have kind of home base, so to speak, we have parts of the universe that have different, you know, combinations of palettes, and so we can play around with these different sounds, and they're all tied to, you know, narrative and contextual parts of the game, and so they're all used for specific reasons, and they support specific things in the game. They're not just, you know, willy-nilly. Of course. But that gives us, the breadth of it gives us a lot of room to stretch out compositionally. And the way we work is really collaborative. You know, like we have a group of people that works together, and we all bring in ideas, and we all kind of craft them. And Deep Stone Lullaby is one that Michael Seacrest brought in to the group, and we all kind of listened to it, and we're like, yeah, that's awesome. We made minor little tweaks, but like he kind of drove that piece home. Like it's his baby, and it's fantastic. Like where we placed it in the game and how it's used, I think really it's really effective. But yeah, Michael Seacrest is the mind behind that piece.
It really, my thought, it's just crazy with the leitmotifs and how each expansion has like these themes that are not necessarily about, like, they're about the like experience, right? They're not about a character, or they're not in that Wagnerian leitmotif phrasing. They're like this is Lightfall, you know, this is the Witch Queen. And it's so interesting to hear how you all take those and twist them and put them in different spots. And like, do you sort of get like a little like giddy, like hee when you're like putting in the Guardian theme in like a certain spot, like, you know, a final stand phase, or like, because you know it's coming, we all know it's there.
Yeah, especially when it's you know, maybe a new presentation, or there's a twist to it that's not, you know, something that's the usual. It's one of my favorite parts of the process, is kind of not just writing the music and making the music, but like the pairing of where the right parts go in the experience. And yeah, so that's always fun. And we have a lot of opportunity to do things like that, like, you know, if somebody's really paying attention to the score, they might get a little chuckle out of it. And like we have fun moments in the game, like Festival of the Lost, and a lot of those things give us true chuckle moments. You know, we can have fun with that stuff. But yeah, you know, a nice presentation of Guardian, or in Lightfall, there was a really great opportunity to, you know, do a heroic Cabal thing when Keitel comes to our rescue, and that kind of thing is cool when we get to take something out of the context we've always heard it in the past and do something new with it. So,
and it keeps it fresh. I mean, it's nice. That's exciting. Does having so many leitmotifs to use while composing make it easier or more difficult to compose, i.e. combining darkness and Cabal motives for Callus and Lightfall, making the process simpler or more complex? And how do you keep track of all of them? And then also thank you for the years of music. I appreciate the hard work, and yeah, it really means a lot to this person.
Awesome. Well, yes and no, and you're welcome. Thank you.
Succinct.
Yeah, it's both more challenging at times and also not. I think it's certain combinations of things can really help say what we want to say musically fairly succinctly, and that's the value in it. Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. I think we document things so people can figure out what they need to figure out if they don't just know it. And for those of us who've been involved for a long time, we just kind of know it, so that helps because there is a lot. But it's like anything. You work with something or you're familiar with something enough, you start to just kind of remember those details. Like I'm trying to think of an example. Like you have a favorite hat for a certain type of activity. Like, oh, I'm going to grab that hat because I know I'm going to go do that thing today. Like it becomes sort of second nature in that regard.
When you sit down to start composing a new piece, like what's your mental process through it? Like, give or take whether or not you have like the source material and the narrative design. Like, is it just like sitting down and like, okay, well, they said they wanted something sad. How do I like, what's the process for you to like, when you start to actually create?
Again, it depends on the context, but in general, if there is some sort of a visual inspiration, whether I can, play the activity or even if it's just concept art, that's always helpful because that kind of sets a mood in its own way.
Yeah.
If I don't have that, or sometimes if I do, having keywords of like what our goal is, we think this is going to need to feel like this. But then for me, I think my favorite way to approach it, whether I have those things or not, is, and every composer is different, but the way I like to approach it is, what does it feel like to me? If I put myself in the shoes of, whoever's perspective it is that's conveying the thing that we're experiencing, how does that feel to me? And then write music that evokes that emotion. And sometimes the tone that I'm told we're trying to hit, I'm like, I don't think that's actually the right tone. Maybe it's like 40% that, but there's 30% this and 20% this other thing and 10% that. And we need to blend all those emotions together. And so feel it first and then score from that place of feeling what it feels like, because you're going to notice the things that you maybe don't notice when you're just looking at words on paper, or, you know what I mean? Like that's the kind of human perspective that bringing that to music that can take it up a notch that I really value in the process. And it's different than just writing something that sounds cool. And obviously you want to do both, but it has to be effective, in my opinion, it has to do both.
Well, and coming from an emotional place is always like pivotally important, I think, because that's when it's authentic. And you see, everybody, this is what I've been talking about emotions and feelings. Skye agrees with me.
I do.
It is interesting though, because some folks don't necessarily have an ear for that, and they don't necessarily know like, oh, I feel sad when I listen to this, or I feel some sort of way, but I don't know how to like really put my finger on it. And I think it's a really interesting thing. I feel like musicians have this inherent quality of understanding their emotions that I think a lot of people in general aren't necessarily allowed to. And so I feel like, it's sort of our job to be vessels to let people understand themselves better. You know what I mean? It's interesting to hear you say that you tend to write from an emotional space first.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, it's like anything. You go to the gym, work out, like it's a muscle you have to develop and flex. And, some people might just inherently be more attuned to that connection or that empathy or whatever you want to call it. And other people, by playing music or listening to music or whatever it is, they might develop it. And so, yeah, I think that's probably a good observation, that music helps bring that out in people. Yeah.
Were there any particular songs that were challenging to make, and why, besides all of them?
I mean, I guess, yeah, all of them, and no, none of them. Like there's always challenges in some regard, but it's always an enjoyable process, right? I think the challenge might come on one cue from the timeline is really short, so I have to do this thing really quickly, or could be a technical thing, or man, I love this cue, but when we recorded it, this problem happened and I had to fix it, and it was really unusual the way we had to fix it. Like all kinds of different types of potential challenges. But I think the enjoyment of actually making it and seeing the whole thing come together kind of outweighs all of that. It's, again, both of those things happen on pretty much every cue to some degree and in some percentage or some balance between them. So this is something I see a lot in video game music, and as an opera tenor, obviously I have a very specific sound, but I tend to notice that video games really, really love using soprano soloists.
And Laura obviously does a fantastic job in Lightfall. Why do you think that sopranos are used so much? And I tend to hear male choirs more in oh, gonna come and eat you alive, is it because of the celestial voice and there's like that sort of like sonoral clarity and like brightness in the soprano sound? Like what appeals to you about that? That's a question for me. Sorry, everybody, but I have to know.
All good. Yeah, I think there's a couple of answers to that. I think probably the most obvious, just functional reason is that when a score is playing in a game and there's a lot of stuff going on, whether that be combat and gunfire and explosions, that range just sits better in the mix. It's easier to hear around and above all the other things. But we use tenor and bass more in the context of a choir, but we've had pieces where they're carrying the melody, and generally that works better in a context where it's like the score for a cinematic, where there's more dialogue and less explosions in combat, or what I mean, where the context allows that range to be heard, because that range easily gets kind of swallowed up by some of the other things. So I think that's kind of the most obvious answer, but there's something kind of calming and reassuring, but at the same time, in some contexts, like the emotional connection of the female voice has a different just psychological impact on people.
That's what
but I think that can be true for any voice in any context, and it's just a matter of balancing all of those things. Like, how's it going to sound in context? Is it going to get stomped, or is it going to read? And all of those things can work together based on the context. But we've had a couple cues where prominent parts were carried in the lower parts of the choir. I personally like working in that range, but it is a consideration for me, is like, is it going to read in context?
Well, especially if the dialogue is the same pitch as where the men are singing, then it's really difficult to hear it. You're right. That's so interesting. Okay, cool. That was just a question for me, because I've been wondering this for like a year. So I've listened to so much video game music this last year, and I was like, where are the men?
Fair question.
The boss fight in the Proving Grounds Nightfall has a truly epic drum solo. Is this a studio artist or somebody on the team? Just know that if nobody else, I am enjoying the absolute heck out of every drum solo. So there's one person who loves the drum solos. I'm sure there are more.
We do record live drums and percussion at times, but often we will record live performances in MIDI. And then the performance is going to sound real, but the samples that are playing it aren't real. But in some cases, they are live drums that are recorded in a room. And so it's kind of a hybrid of those things. Usually when there's a drum solo, it's going to be live, but it's always going to be performed, even if it's, performed with MIDI.
Yeah, and then you looped in. That's cool. As an audio producer and composer myself, I'm curious what sample libraries he and or his team use to create mock-ups and mixes. I don't understand this question, so I'm just asking it. So if it's like...
Yeah, all good. Yeah, I mean, lots. I won't list them all, but we are fortunate to be able to record pretty much all of the music live. And so the sample libraries and instruments that we use largely are just for mock-ups. They're intended to kind of convey what the music will sound like, but then the final version of it is usually,
that's awesome.
Live musicians. So
first of all, that's really cool. Do you go to a studio? Do they come into the studio, or do you go out to like a concert hall or something?
We recorded several different studios. Oftentimes we'll go there in person. During the last few years, we weren't always there in person, and we were doing a lot of it remote. We go into a studio, the musicians come into the studio. It's, they're sight reading the music for the most part. They've never seen it before, and it's a pretty fun process. So
then, like, let's say it's like the Witness or Darkness theme. I don't actually know the official title of that motive, but like, that if that was helpful too. When
that was a good likeness. I know what you mean.
I'm trying to do the synth tweak there. I don't know. So they'll record that, and then you'll go into the studio and you'll like add the audio adjustments to like distort it or kind of create this, that discomfortable feeling. I don't really know what you're doing, but you're doing something. That's how that works, right?
Yeah. So that particular theme has been presented in a bunch of ways in a bunch of different contexts, but there is a synth element that's kind of primary with the portamento pitch bend thing that you're referring to. But we've recorded it, doubling it with choir or with cello or low brass and, different combinations of orchestra with a synth and sometimes without synth. One of my favorites does use, the low strings and really kind of sliding the notes, and that blend is really, really effective. But yeah, we are kind of tailoring the arrangement or, the production, the palette of what that sounds like to the specific moment where it's going to be presented and what
the narrative.
Yeah, what the combination needs basically.
Yeah. I would like to know about Journey by Michael Salvatore and Skye Lewin, how the song came to be, what emotions they were trying to express, and if they ever thought of reusing it or remixing it. I believe having a song from the beginning of Destiny 2 show up at the end of Destiny 2 would hit so hard for players.
That's one that actually originated and brought that to the team, primary composer on it. It was basically written with that sense of loss in mind, or like the gravity of the moment where it was placed in the game. And while the cue kind of starts off with that, then it goes on to convey the sense of kind of picking oneself up and overcoming that loss and going on to triumph eventually. But it's that kind of journey from being at rock bottom to being a guardian. And again, it's kind of one of those cues that comes out of that emotional, what does it feel like? What if I were in that person's shoes, what would I be experiencing, and how do I convey that? Yeah, I can't comment on the rest.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I shouldn't even have said that part. I have to say, like, that piece in particular is just so good. Really, what was your incentive for like choosing to have a string quartet? Like, what do you remember? Like, were you like, yeah, string quartet here would be like a very like bleak sound, very minimal. We build, we start with one, then we add the other one, then we create this sort of like galvanization sound. Like, what was the intention there for you in creating that?
Yeah, you kind of got that. I mean, it's a very low moment. It starts off when we're at our weakest, and a solo voice starts it off, in the quartet. And partly we hadn't really used quartet, before, and I liked the feeling of it musically, but also the way that it allowed to build up from that solo voice, gradually get a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger, and expressing those emotions of, sadness and loss and all of that the opening part of the cue does, and then getting even bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as it grows. It just was a good natural evolution. And yeah, like you said, it kind of came from that. The arrangement paired well with what it was trying to convey.
Yeah.
We did do a version that was choral, and that's actually one of my favorite versions of it as well. It's been in the game.
Oh,
you probably have heard it. It lives,
sure I have.
and lives in various places, but it's entirely choral version of the opening, and I also really like that arrangement as well.
One of the big things that I'm always trying to advocate for is this idea that there's so much video game music that unfortunately is relegated to the medium, which is perfectly fine, and it moves millions upon millions of people. And I actually think that Journey has been played in a symphony hall for like video game concert night or whatever. But like, does it matter to you if it was like programmed alongside like Mendelssohn or Beethoven? Like, would you want that, or are you okay with where it is? And
I mean, no, I wouldn't say it's like something I've ever really worried about, but yeah, it's cool when it happens. Yes, it's been like that cue and others have been performed live, and that's amazing. I think video game music in general doesn't quite get the same level of attention as, concert music. And that's for good reasons. Video games have evolved a lot in a very short amount of time. And, a lot of people still hear a video game score and they think, 8-bit.
Beep boops.
Yeah, exactly. But, to be fair, some of those beep boop scores were fantastic. They were produced with, very limited arrangement and palettes and sound sources. But the difference is that evolution has happened a lot and very recently, and there are some amazing scores out there, and it's humbling to be a part of it in some small way, because I'll listen to scores and just be like, wow, that's fantastic. I mean, I grew up listening to all kinds of actual concert music and actual classical music, and while that probably soaks in and comes out of the sponge, so to speak, like, I think video game music has gone a huge ways in that direction of kind of being more serious as an art form, and even the last few decades, but definitely recently. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not worried about that, and it's not something I have ever
if it happened, cool.
Yeah, if it happens, cool. But like, it is what it is, and I think that all we can do with whatever we put our mind to, like whatever you're doing, whatever you're creating, is just do the best you can with it and enjoy it the most you can. And if that's what comes out of it as a result, like, hey, cool, at least you enjoyed the journey, Right.
And I think that probably matters more. I would love to know of any possible influences when it comes to the Lightfall expansion. I feel like there's a definite 80s vibe, but it could just be my nostalgia talking.
I mean, nostalgia says a lot, but yeah, I mean, the game kind of has a little bit of that action hero feel, and the score reflects that. And I think we we all just kind of had a blast putting all those
You can
parts
tell.
together. Yeah.
You can tell.
Yeah, it was
What's
fun.
What's it? Battle Ready when the training montage? Man, that's cool.
Yeah, we had a good time with those cues.
You play Destiny?
I do. Although I have played much less over the last few years. My time is limited, shall we say.
Yeah.
So I play a lot while we're making the game, but then once it's actually live, the amount of playing that I get to do and how quickly I get to do it is a little lumbering. Myself and a couple others, we played through Witch Queen on Legendary 3-player, and that's slow going. I'm not as efficient when we play on that level of gameplay because I don't play as much as I used to. You know, when I was younger, I played a lot more games, and my how shall we say, competency was higher than it is now. But I do like our game. It's fun to play.
Do you have a favorite gun, raid, and a dungeon?
That's a really hard question. Favorite gun? There's a bunch. I keep coming back to Symmetry. I really like Symmetry. I like scout rifles in general. Part of the draw to me about first-person shooter games is just the accuracy. So like being able to like find that one moment when it's the right moment, and instead of just bunch of shots. But each person has their preference. Like that's mine. I like the other thing sometimes, especially when I'm just getting my butt whooped. I'll pull something out that's a little bigger, and that helps. Yeah, I guess going back, I really like Vault of Glass. I really liked the raid from Rise of Iron was fun in a lot of ways. There's parts of all of them that I really love. I will admit that only a handful of them have I ever actually played in retail, and so I've not gotten the satisfaction of playing them in the same way that people experience them in real life. And so I think my preferences are maybe biased in that regard. Dungeon, same thing. I've actually played fewer of the dungeons in real life, so to speak, than in development.
I don't think I've played any of them.
It's also hard, when you're playing raids and playing dungeons, you need more time, and you need to be able to sit down with a larger chunk of time. And one of the constraints for me lately is I have small chunks of time. And so I can play things like PvP or chunk of a mission way easier than something like a raid, but still they're worth digging into, and they're actually some of my favorite parts of the game. I just wish I had better ability to actually enjoy them as an experience.
When I turned 35, I started falling asleep. I'm like sitting here at 9 o'clock, and I'm just like, literally, I'll be on stream, and I'm just like,
that's where energy drinks come in, right?
Yeah, but I'm too old for those.
Yeah, I guess at 9 o'clock, that might be a little too late for caffeine. But
last time I did an energy, it was like a Monster energy drink. I was like 23. I drank it at 11. I stayed awake until 7 a.m. Skye. I was just like, boom, never again.
Yeah, I've had a few of those.
What are the main composers that inspire you?
I mean, that's a great question. I can list some of the ones that I love listening to, but I would say as far as how it relates to my work, I don't really I try not to be inspired by a specific piece of music or a specific composer. I'd rather bring a clean slate to the table and just kind of do what feels like it needs, like listen to the experience as it's kind of shaping up, and like what's missing, what does it want as far as music that I love, or composers that I love, like Bach and Ravel, Debussy, like all the impressionist stuff I really drawn to growing up. But like then I grew up listening to everything else that's not classical, like the Doors and Zeppelin, and you name the band, I've probably listened to them and enjoyed them, and a lot of pop and other genres. And before I was more focused on composition, I was spending more of my time in songwriting and production and in that world, and I really enjoy that stuff too. So there's tons of influences from tons of different genres and artists and composers and writers and producers and all of it. It's all fun in its own way.
It really comes through, and the last thing I'd like to say certainly is that, like, I think you're the third composer I've had a chat with, and it's such a pleasure for me because I spent a decade. I mean, I did sing for some contemporary works, but one of my biggest frustrations in the opera industry, not that there isn't plenty of talent and talented contemporary composers, but one of the things that I've really been stunned by, especially in the last year where I've been hyper focused on video game music every day, basically, is the fact that they were all right here. And all these contemporary composers are writing this incredible music. And, I thank you and for bearing your soul into this stuff. And I think the Destiny community at large is so appreciative of just the effort and the work that goes into the whole process, but certainly the music. And I mean, there were tons of comments that I didn't include that were like, thank you so much. Like, this music has made my life so much better. Thank you so much for giving me the music that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Like, you know what I mean? So like, it's just so incredible to be able to have us sit down with these guys, especially with your insane schedule. And that means a lot to me and all of them too. So thanks for taking the time out.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for listening. And it's a pleasure to be able to do this. I'm grateful for that. So, yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to, skim around and I'll have chapters and stuff, but watch the whole thing. It helps the algorithm and, all that stupid stuff. But anyway, thanks a ton and we'll see you later. Bye. See you later.